So in this video I'm going to show you how to do a mash, a full grain mash. So my current setup is I have about 6-7 litres of about 80 degrees water, just normal tap water, in my copper. I have an empty mash tun. I have a notebook to make notes of what I'm going to put the grain. Scales, a jug, a 25 kilo bag of Golden Promise. The Golden Promise is a little bit less efficient, has a little bit less sugar in than Maratona, so you need to account for that. And today I'm going to be doing a Cara Red malt with a little bit of chocolate malt beer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure with my jug about 2.2 kilos of Golden Promise, add probably all of this Cara Red malt and add a little bit of chocolate malt into the mash tun, making sure I weigh each of the grains as I'm going along. And once I've made a record of that and all of the grains are in the mash tun, I'll then show you what to do next. So in my mash tun now I have 2.3 kilos of Golden Promise, 250 grams of Cara Red and 20 grams of chocolate malt. Now chocolate malt does make very dark beer, so you just want to use a little bit if you want to make a little bit more colour to the beer. My water is at about 78 degrees and I'm just going to now add the water to the mash tun, mix it all thoroughly, put the lid on and then wrap it up in some towels for about an hour and a half. Now the aim is, this is at 78 degrees, the grains are about 15-16 degrees, so what you're aiming for is a mash temperature of about 66 to 70 degrees and to try and maintain that for an hour and a half. Now what I'm going to do is wrap it up in lots of towels to insulate it for that period. So when I've done that, I'll let you know what to do next. So you can see I've poured my hot water into the mash tun and added the grains, and it's kind of like a sort of a thick sort of porridgey mix consistency. So you don't want to saturate the grains too much with water, but you want to make sure that they're freely suspended and well mixed. These grains currently contain quite a lot of sugars, quite a lot of starchy sugars, which don't make beer. So what we're doing now is at about 66 degrees, the enzymes in the grains are really good at converting the starchy sugars into sugars which are really good for beer. So you can see on my thermometer, I'm kind of high 60s, about 67, 68, which is fine. So I'm going to put the lid on this now, wrap it up in towels and leave it for an hour and a half. Okay, so this is an hour and a half later and the mash has done its job. As you can see now, we got some very nice sugary wort, you can call it wort at this stage. So now what we need to do is remove the grains from the sugary syrup which we'll be using to make beer. So what I've got is I've got about 4 or 5 litres of water at about 70 degrees. Now the reason why 70 degrees, it just makes it a little bit faster to boil the water once you've finished straining it, and also it helps extract the sugars from the grain. And what I've also got is a bit of DIY job here. So we got a egg splatter which I've removed the obviously the metal casing around it. I've got a 15 litre fermentation barrel which I've drilled some holes in, and that's sitting inside of a 23 litre fermentation barrel. I've just used the outside bits of the actual 15 litre barrel itself to attach to the side of the 23 litre barrel. So what I'm going to do now is just take these grains, pour it in, and then using the jug I'm just going to slowly strain the mixture so that we extract the last bit of sugars from the grain. So as you can hear now, the liquid straining through the sieve. So it's just a case of getting your jug, getting some water. Let's just rinse out this first, get all nice sugars in here, give it a nice rinse. And sparging you can do many ways, but the way I like to do it is to get a little bit of water and then just slowly tip it over. Try and cover as much as you can. Just keep repeating this until you have about 10 litres of liquid. Now it's really useful using these fermentation vessels because you can actually measure how much liquid you got as you go along. So just keep going, straining all the grains until you get about 10 litres of liquid. So as you can see, we're nearly there, nearly at 10 litres. I'm just going to use a little potato masher just to give it a little push, get some more liquid through out of these grains. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this, what's now called spent grain, because we've used all of its sugars, extracted all of its sugars, and then I'm going to pour this liquid into the copper and then bring it to the boil. So as you see now, all of the water's in the copper, and we're in the process of bringing it up to the boil, and when it's at the boil I'll show you the next part of the process. But in the meantime, I want to talk to you about cleaning. So after the boil, everything which touches beer must be sterile. Before the boil, anything which touches the grains or the wort can be just clean, doesn't need to be sterile. So how do I make things sterile? Now the easiest way to do it is, first of all, I clean it with good old fashioned washing up liquid and some kind of scrubber and hot water, then give it a really good rinse. So this has been cleaned with this washing up liquid and hot water. And then what I'm going to do is use something called Star San. Now Star San is a alkali sanitizer, and you only require a very small amount. It's perfectly food grade safe. And what you do is you pour a little bit in with about 15 to 20 mils with about 10 litres of cold water, and leave it there. I generally leave it there until I need it, about half an hour, but you can generally only leave it for about 5 minutes if you need to. Because it's an alkali sanitizer, when it gets in contact with the beer at the end, beer is acidic, so it'll be neutralised. So any foam or residue which is in there will be completely fine. So I'm going to put some in now. So how much do you need? Now they did say you're supposed to measure this out, but I've been brewing for a long time and I've never had a problem with this, so I put in about that much. Bit of water and full wax, lots of foam. The foam is what cleans it, so you want lots of foam. And then just swirl it all around until it's all sanitized. Okay, so you can see I've got about 10 litres of a sterilised solution in my fermenter. I'm going to put a few things in now. First thing I'm going to put in is a airlock to let carbon dioxide out and no nasties in. Second thing I'm going to put in is a rubber bung to go in the top of my lid. Then a glass to get a sample of my wort later. And a whisk to create lots of air for the yeast later on. The final thing I need is a teaspoon for my yeast from the freezer, which I'll explain later on. Put them all in, give them a good stir around, let them get sterilised. Okay, so my water is nearly boiled, it's at about 95 degrees. So what I'm watching for now is something called hop break. And when the water reaches 100 degrees, it's going to foam up quite rapidly and it may spill over. So at that point in time, you need to make sure you've got your hand on the heat, ready to turn down as soon as it reaches hop break. Once it does that once, it generally won't do it again. And once the boil starts, we'll then put our first addition of hops in. So the hops I'm going to be using today is Willamette, which I think is a New Zealand variety of hops, but it's this one's from the USA. So I've got my scales. I'm going to measure out about 10 grams or so of these hops to add to the beginning of the boil, which will be my bittering addition. So the first hops you add into a batch of beer is what creates the bitterness in beer. And the hops you add at the end are called aromatic or flavouring additions, and they create the aromatic and flavours of hops in beer. So I'm just going to wait for it to boil up till it gets to hop break, then turn the heat down and add my first batch of hops and leave it boiling for around about half an hour. So you can see we're nearly there. It's just starting to boil, and it's going to start to froth up pretty quickly now, so I need to keep an eye on it. So as you can see, the water's now been boiling for about 25 minutes or so. So now we're now approaching the last 15 minutes of the boil. And this is when we add our fining. In this instance, it's called a Protofloc tablet. Now you only need half for a batch this size, so what I generally do is line up my knife, get a rolling pin and whack it, and that will split it in two. I'm also going to put my second edition of hops in, which is 10 grams of Williamette. So put half of the Protofloc tablet in, let it boil for another 15 minutes, then we turn the heat off and put the final edition of hops in. So putting the Protofloc tablet in, or half of one, in a minus 15 minutes. Okay, so it's now been boiling for about 40-45 minutes. I'm going to add my final edition of hops. And then turn off the heat. Put the lid on and then transfer it into a bath of cold water and leave it there for half an hour. What we're trying to do now is crash cool it. So I've got my wort now cooling in a bath of cold water, which I'm going to leave there for about half an hour. And in the sterilise solution I've also put my auto siphon, which I'm going to use to siphon off the beer from the copper into the fermentation vessel a bit later on. So it's been about half an hour now where I've put my copper in cold tap water, and this water around it is really hot now. So what I'm going to do is change the water and then add loads of ice packs, leave it for another 20 or so minutes. So I've now added fresh cold water around the copper with lots of ice packs, which obviously are frozen. This should do its stuff in about 20 minutes. It should bring the water down to about 35-40 degrees, which is perfect for what we need to do next. So about 15-20 minutes like this, and then it should be ready. So I've emptied the sterilised solution from my fermenter and moved it into my bigger fermentation barrel. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to siphon the beer into my fermentation vessel and try and leave as much sediment as I can behind in the copper. So as you can see, siphoning started. It looks pretty clear already, which is really good. So it seems like the crash cooling has had its desired effect. So I'm going to keep siphoning it until I got as much liquid as I can without getting any of the harsh sediment from the bottom. So I've siphoned about 8 litres of water from the copper, and as you can see I've left quite a lot of sediment behind in the copper. So obviously I'm looking for about 12 litres of wort which I want to ferment. So this is currently at about 26-24 degrees. So I'm going to add about 3 litres of cold water and then take a measurement with a glass, sterilised glass, and pour that into a hydrometer and see what gravity I'm at now. So I'm just adding the cold water to the fermenter to get the correct volume. About that, about 11-12 litres, probably 11 litres, a bit more. Well, so I'm going to get my sterilised glass, and get a sample of the wort, and then pour that into my my trial jar. Put the hydrometer in. There's a bit too much in there. Just pass them out. let it suspend. We're looking for about 1040 to produce a 5% beer. I think we're near enough bang on here. Yeah, pretty much 1040, which is perfect for what we want. Okay, so we are at about 22 degrees according to my temperature strip, and we are at about 13 litres of volume. We've got 1040 gravity, which is what we want. I just took my yeast out of the freezer, so I'm ready to put it in now. So if I get my sterilised whisk it up, get lots of air, get lots of oxygen in it. As much air as we can into it. I'm going to fish out my sterilised spoon. Get a nice heaped teaspoon of yeast. About that much. And then just sprinkle it on. Obviously this yeast has been frozen, but it'll soon start doing its stuff. It'll take a little bit of time to react. Just a tiny bit more. So you want just to kind of a heaped teaspoon. Pretty much it. I'm going to construct my lid. I'm going to get my top out. So I need the bung. I need this bit. So this bung goes in the lid. Okay, I'm going to get my airlock. And empty it so it's only a third full. Okay, so you want about a third full. And then put it in. And that's it. Leave it for a month at about 20 degrees room temperature. Make sure it's well sealed.